Hi again and welcome back to a beginner's guide to music direction in musical theatre. Now, in the last video, we started to look at different locations for your band in your musical production and the positioning of instruments. The orchestra pit of a typical theatre or venue is, in my opinion, by far the least problematic of all locations a band or orchestra could be placed. They are designed in such a way that the musicians aren't seen, something I'm particularly keen on, and the volume levels are much easier to control as your performers sing over the musicians, literally. But in this video, we're going to look at taking the band or orchestra out of the pit and into other areas of the performance venue. Please do subscribe by hitting the button below so you can be informed when further videos are released, and let me know if there's something specific you want me to cover, and keep the questions coming. Okay then, time to jump out of the pit. Once the band or orchestra leaves its traditional location, things generally get more technical. But as soon as there is a proposal that your musicians may be located elsewhere, you need to start your planning. In this first example, let's look at the band being part of the on-stage team. This is usually for only 3 reasons. The production is written in such ways to include a live band of musicians. The director wants to incorporate musicians within the performance for artistic reasons, or there physically isn't enough room elsewhere. If this is confirmed that your musicians are to be relocated, you need to agree with the director and stage designer or manager on the amount of room that needs to be dedicated for your musicians. They will rely on you for this. It may be the full width of the stage. If so, what depth would you need? Think about where you as the MD will be positioned, whether playing or not. Is it facing across the stage, or centre stage facing towards the audience, or away from the audience? The band will need to see you, but unfortunately the company won't. A decision to relocate the band then will also need to be taken into consideration during the rehearsal process, insofar as the company will not be able to see you for any cues, unless you are to be featured on some form of video relay. Such video relays generally have monitors for the cast to view when required. Now, if the group you're working with has access to such equipment or will be willing to hire such equipment, it will give added comfort to your performers. But don't worry too much if such a system isn't available. You'll be surprised at how adaptable a company can be if you stop cueing them. They soon learn. The come off, the end of a number, will need to be learnt by ensuring the company has learnt to count the number of beats for the final note or chord, for instance, or ensure they are used to listening to cues within the orchestration. Please be aware of these issues throughout the rehearsal process and teach them accordingly. As a performer, it can be a very different experience singing on stage when the accompaniment comes from the back of the stage. You may need to mention this at rehearsals, as some find it slightly disorientating. All music directors feel a responsibility for the sound their band or orchestra produces. In situations like this, however, your concentration should be directed towards how the band play, and try to avoid any sense of responsibility for sound balance. You're definitely not going to be located in any position to judge how your musicians are heard by the audience. Now, this is something that can be very difficult for some music directors, as you have to have complete confidence in your sound engineer. Given the majority of performers are now mic'd and there are more instruments using amplification, such as keyboards and guitars for instance, the role of the sound engineer is now as important as ever. Listen to what they have to say. They may not be musicians, but they know when your drummer is playing too loud, for instance. Once musicians are on stage, the sound technicians are the ones that need to manage sound levels. Speak to the sound crew early in the rehearsal process once a decision has been made where to locate the band. They will need time to plan what equipment may be needed. Take some time to study some basic sound equipment and associated terminology. Think about and discuss with your sound engineer monitoring, or foldback as it's sometimes called. Know what a DI box is or an XLR connector. All this type of information can add to your general knowledge of sound, as the more productions you do, the more you will need to get involved in this non-musical area of theatre technology. If your production is a rock pop type musical, you may need to hire or borrow a drum shield. These are acrylic panels that are particularly useful to use with drummers and will enable your sound engineer to better manage sound coming from on stage. Alternatively, your drummer's playing position could be partly in the wings and mic, giving more control to the sound department. Whatever advice you get from your sound engineer, listen to them. Some smaller venues will have no room for a small band, let alone something verging on the size of a small orchestra, and there is no room for it on stage. When a location is termed as remote, the musicians could be placed at the side of the stage or even in a different room. I've even heard of bands being located in a different building. When we start to think about a remote band, technology becomes even more important. Talk to your sound crew as soon as such a decision has been made. As with the band being on stage, the same is true when it comes to the company, either learning cues or relying on video relays. But now things get even more complicated, as you will need some form of video relay of action on stage for all kinds of reasons, not least visual cues. The position of instruments is less important and is usually dependent on the space available. However, the same rules apply regarding ensuring that bass and drums are together and the various sections stay together. It's very likely that the band and all the instruments are mic'd and or fed through the front of house sound desk for mixing by your sound engineer. You will also need some way of being able to hear what's happening on stage, and this will either be provided either through a monitor speaker or even through headphones. While we're talking about monitoring, I personally like to use something like this. It's a 150 watt, wow, not that you'll ever need anything like that, 150 watt personal PA monitor. It's basically an active speaker, or should I say a small amplifier with a speaker built in. On the rear we've got a couple of inputs, mic line inputs, another two on the front. We've got an auxiliary input. We've also got a 3.5 jack input for CDs or anything from your iPhone or whatever you would need to use. A little bit of EQ, full mixing facilities, and what I particularly like about this one is that it's got a socket underneath, so you can easily place that on a microphone stand. And using this for monitoring when you've got less than 12 inches from your ear, it's an ideal piece of kit to have if you need to monitor whether you're conducting or whether you're playing. That particular one retails for about $135, £100. When monitoring is to be done on headphones, this can take a little bit more getting used to, and I find that a pair of these is much easier. These are the Shure 215 earpieces. These are designed for monitoring rather than listening to everyday music. They have a spongy earpiece that molds to your ear and has great sound isolating properties. I would advise that perhaps if you're listening to just a vocal feed, you only use one of these and then the other ear is left free to hear the ambient sound of the band around you. A group of musicians playing together, whether it's a small band or a string quartet, inherently balance their sound to each other. It's vital that all musicians listen to each other to enable a well-balanced sound. We do it without even thinking. But when we're asked to wear headphones while playing and balance all other instruments coming through your headphones, this can take some getting used to. The more complex systems may require you to wear headphones and have a personal mixer to listen to your own adjustable mix of your musicians, and each musician will have a similar system. These systems would be hired and or supplied by the venue, but we are now at some level of significant expense and complexity. So then, when your band is remote, the basics you need is a video relay to view the stage and a vocal feed from the sound desk, either through a monitor speaker or headphones. And one final piece of advice. I would strongly recommend that you have a fellow musician friend that isn't involved in your production to listen out front to the balance of your orchestra or band. I'm sure those involved in this story won't mind me repeating it, but a couple of years ago I was asked by a director friend to help him put an amateur production into a local theatre, where a very good 12-piece band was located off stage. While sitting in the auditorium throughout the first act, all I could hear was the drums, one reed player, the second key player, very loud, and the occasional trumpet. By the interval, I had to get involved, and after conversation with the company's management and sound technician, who told me he had only ever mixed a 4-piece rock band and would welcome any advice he could glean from my musician skills. Thankfully, he was exceedingly grateful and accepting of my advice, and after a few adjustments to the mix, we were able to hear the remaining 8 players for the rest of the run. Bands on stage or off stage will always cause some level of trust in others. Try to cover all bases. Learn the basics of sound and try to have a trusted friend that knows how it should sound out front. See you next time.